Biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome to the Mark Steyn Show on your telly and on your wireless. We're everywhere except on the microchip they implant with the 4th jab. You can just get the BBC with that. Tonight, Novak Djokovic's big win on the court. Whoops, sorry, did I say on the court? I meant, of course, in the court, federal court in Melbourne, where, as you've just heard from Nigel, he and his lawyers won in straight sets. Also in sports news, in swimming, the female-to-male transgender has beaten the male-to-female transgender. I don't think either of them were doing the breaststroke. Plus, COVID. The Cure has now parted company completely from the disease. All that and the indispensable part of the show, your questions and comments. Let me know what's on your mind by emailing gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. But first, as always on GB News, the news. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Mark, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. These are the top stories. The government says it'll take every step necessary to protect leaseholders in the ongoing cladding crisis. Housing Secretary Michael Gove told MPs the building industry should fix dangerous cladding in medium-rise blocks. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said the action is very late. Mr Gove told the Commons developers who sought to profit should take full responsibility.
Leaseholders are shouldering a desperately unfair burden. They're blameless, and it is morally wrong that they should be the ones asked to pay the price. I'm clear about who should pay the price for remedying failures. It should be the industries who profited as they caused the problem, and those who continue to profit as they make it worse.
A Met police officer accused of a number of sex offences faces 9 further charges, including 6 counts of rape. The Crown Prosecution Service says David Carrick is now accused of 29 crimes. The new charges relate to 4 women and alleged to have taken place between 2009 and 2018. He'll appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on Wednesday. The 47-year-old has denied 20 previous charges against him. Labour is accusing the Prime Minister of having no regard for the rules after a leaked email shows Downing Street staff were invited to a party during lockdown. According to ITV News, more than 100 staff were asked to bring their own booze for socially distanced drinks in Number 10's garden on the 20th of May 2020. The email was reportedly sent by Boris Johnson's principal private secretary. This alleged gathering is separate to an event in which a photo showed the PM and his wife in the garden with colleagues. Novak Djokovic says he's pleased and grateful after a judge overturned his visa cancellation and wants to compete in the Australian Open. Earlier today, a court ruled he did have the required medical exemption to enter the country without a COVID vaccine. But Australia's immigration minister still has the power to recancel the visa and deport him. Speaking to GB News, the tennis star's uncle, Goran Djokovic, says his nephew has been treated like an animal.
If Novak is not welcoming, they're supposed to say that. Please don't come. And if they issue the visa for him, and after that they arrest him, this is like, for me, it looks like a trap for the animals, you know, like a wolf. They invite him to come and they trap him and put him in the jail, trying to put him on his knees.
Buckingham Palace has revealed the full lineup of celebrations for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in June. Street parties and a concert with some of the world's biggest entertainment stars are part of the plans to mark Her Majesty's 70 years on the throne. It will culminate in a 4-day UK bank holiday weekend from the 2nd to the 5th of June. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, let's get back to Mark Steyn.
as you've heard from Tamsin and Nigel, the world's #1 tennis player is no longer being detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. Novak, I should say, Novaks, as some of the signs say. Novak Djokovic has been sprung from chokey by order of Mr. Justice Kelly in the Federal Circuit Court at Melbourne. And despite threats from the Australian government to deport him and ban him for 3 years, he has been cited at the Rod Laver Arena, getting ready for the Australian Open. What's going on back of this? Clearly, the decision by Australian immigration authorities to make an example of Djokovic was a political stunt. It's just a question of how high up in the government it goes. Britain's Home Office isn't above such stunts. You may recall the decision to deny the Dutch MP Geert Wilders entry to the UK at Heathrow when he'd landed to give a speech at the House of Lords. Lord Ahmed, the Labour peer, who's now a convicted child sex criminal, played a big part in that. A characteristically brilliant call by the Home Office. The point to bear in mind, as I tried to emphasise Friday, is that you can't get on a plane to Australia without a valid Australian visa permitting you to enter the country. In this case, the tennis player had a temporary activity subclass 408 visa. So Djokovic had the permission of Her Majesty's government to come to Australia, and then once he was en route, they changed their mind. Tyranny is always capricious. Djokovic followed the rules, was issued a visa under those rules, and then someone quite high up in the Aussie government said, screw the rules. Oh, but why would they damage the Australian Open? Well, if they cared a jot or tittle about international events in Australia, the last 2 years would have been very different. The lucky country consciously chose a form of extreme isolation far beyond any other major Western nation, and it's been a complete stinking flopperoo. Omicron is dripping off every light bulb in Melbourne. It's hanging off every Victorian constable's face mask. Australia is currently running at about 2,000 new COVID cases per million people per day. India is running at about 12 new cases per million people per day. Australia has 90% vaccination, India only 44%. But in various parts of the country, its health authorities have made widely available kits of cheap and cheerful therapeutics: paracetamol, zinc, ivermectin, azithromycin. Australia, or East Germany with koalas, as the internet wags have been saying now, Australia spent 2 years destroying normal life for no good reason. And by any rational measure, its policies are now a total failure. And so the Australian government needs a distraction, and Djokovic, a famous foreigner who's had the COVID recently and therefore has something called natural immunity, which up to 2 years ago everybody used to believe in. So he's got the natural immunity and he's no threat to anyone, but he was the perfect target. And judging from the sustained 2-minute hate from online Australians, a big chunk of all the mates, blokes, sockers and larrikings tossing another 4X on the barbie fell for it. Instead of hurling your Omicron sodden boomerangs at Djokovic and waiting for them to come back at you, maybe you should man up and ask Scott Morrison to order up some of those cheapo Uttar Pradesh therapeutic grab bags before the next virus makes landfall. They're only 27 rupees, and they can hardly fail more than the last 2 years of Australian public policy. I'm not singling out Scott Morrison here. Boris Johnson, Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Joe Biden. This is the biggest public policy failure in peacetime. And ScoMo won't be the last to find that it's easier to fluff up a celebrity distraction than climb down from the insanity. What do you reckon? I know Nigel was, the Farage was being barraged by people who are hot for vaccinations and have no sympathy for Djokovic. If you have sympathy for the rule of law, then the terms on which he boarded that plane should have been sufficient, and the Australian government should not have ripped them up halfway through the flight. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. Here now is Dr. Nina Markovic-Kars, a political scientist and Director of Communications from Solve Law Immigration in Sydney. Nina, it's great to see you. This is being reported in Serbia as a Serbia-Australia showdown, and the Serb media and the Serb people seem to feel that basically Djokovic has cleaned Australia's clock and that this is a great victory for Serbia. How do you think Australia is looking to the world today?
Everybody who believes in the rule of law and the truth believes that Novak Djokovic has won. His family launched an extraordinary appeal begging the Queen of Australia, Her Majesty, to get involved and save their son from political entrapment. I mean, those were extraordinary words which we could hear at midnight Australian time or 2 p.m. European time. Australians are divided. We are in the middle of a pre-election race, informal pre-election race. The elections are coming up in a couple of months. Before that, we will have a federal budget. And all sides of politics, the coalition, the Labour government of Dan Andrews, everybody's trying to chip in and gain political points over the head of one man who, according to Justice Kelly, has satisfied all legal requirements to enter Australia. The judge asked, what could this man have done more? He had medical exemptions from 2 Australian boards, which assessed his applications blindly, meaning they did not know who the person in question is.
Now, you mentioned this election coming up in March. Australia has fixed date elections and also compulsory voting. And Scott Morrison, who is the Prime Minister from the supposedly right of centre Liberal Party, hasn't got much to run on because most of his last ministry has been actually the COVID era. So he's asking to be re-elected without having done anything other than shut down the country. And and as I suggested, what he did to this tennis player and what the Home Office Minister is still threatening to do, and that's to deport him and ban him for 3 years, is being seen as a stunt, that this is some red meat because, Australians will at least have the consolation of knowing that foreigners are being treated as lousily as they are. Do you think that's what's behind it?
There is a lot of sovereignty debate. I mean, this is not about sovereignty. This is about personal vengeance potentially by somebody in the Australian government against Novak Djokovic. If he had satisfied all legal requirements, why can't the rule of law and the judgment be enough? It is absolutely extraordinary. Elections are coming up by May. March will be the budget time. If you go to the shops tonight, like last night, shelves were empty in Sydney. You couldn't buy bread and juice, and the chain of supply chains are completely collapsing. This is extraordinary for 21st century Australia. Us from former authoritarian regimes are having flashbacks of scarcity. I mean, this is not Australia as we know it. In addition, when it comes to decision making, the judge Anthony Kelly, it was done in an unreasonable way. I mean, the notion clearly says that Australia has to pay the Australian government all legal costs to Novak Djokovic's team. And then if the Prime Minister or another minister goes to quash the court's order, I mean, are we becoming Myanmar? What is going on in this country?
Right, no, that's a very good point. I mean, the judge's order is very interesting. Basically, they told him, Djokovic, at 5:30 in the morning that they were going to tear up his visa, and he had until 8:30 to respond. So he's sitting there thinking, in the detention room, thinking, where am I going to rustle up a lawyer at 5:30 in the morning? That's not generally lawyers' hours. And then instead of giving him the 3 hours, they come in like 45 minutes later and say, sorry, time's up. So that's what I find distressing about this, because Australians cheering this on are cheering, as you said, I don't know whether it's appropriate to compare them to Burma, but it's certainly appropriate to compare them to other Australian governments. And the idea that if they can do this to Djokovic, they can do this to any bloke in New South Wales or Victoria or Perth or wherever they want to go. And so why is it, do you think, that Australians generally seem to support the 2-minute hate against Djokovic?
There has been a lot of negative publicity against Djokovic, not just in the Australian media, but in Italian press, for example. I mean, completely unfair comparisons. Obviously, this is all part of a political game in Australia. Different levels of government don't talk to each other, states and territories. I mean, it is a complete governance mess, and this is just one manifestation of that. So perhaps this had to happen for the world to see how Australians are living. And you know, we can't go to Western Australia. I was raised in Western Australia. I cannot enter Western Australia despite satisfying all requirements, for example. So we live in states, not even in a federal state anymore. It's absolutely extraordinary. And the question of why there is some sort of personal or political vengeance against Djokovic, I mean, it defies reason. Also, as a mother of 2 children with anaphylaxis, I can completely understand his mother who is concerned about her son not receiving breakfast. I mean, he has severe food allergies and other autoimmune conditions. If you look at the first document submitted to the court and follow-up documents, the judge reserved the right for privacy for Novak Djokovic's medical history. And this assessment was also done by an Australian associate professor and leading doctor of particular diseases. So, you know, he's the one requesting privacy, and the whole world, so to speak, is saying he's spoiled rich jet setter with a personal chef. Well, if you have a severe food allergy, everybody who has a child or family member knows that it is a very risky business to travel, let alone be flying for 25 hours, then being locked up, incommunicado. This is what his lawyers have said. He had no access to phone.
No.
This was psychological torture more than physical, really. I mean, not having breakfast is bad enough, but being allowed to rest for a half an hour when you were told you have many more hours. I mean, this is the psychological game.
No, that's a very good point, because any jihadist that they decided to, some guy coming back from having some fun chopping heads off with ISIS, and they arrest him when he returns to Australia, the first murmur that he's not getting his special dietary requirements, and it's a huge big hoo-ha over there. And you've actually made a brilliant point about the way you're no longer in a federated Commonwealth anymore, but that Australia has dissolved into these separate states, and much like before 1901, but with the difference that you can't go from New South Wales to Western Australia. And Victoria obviously being the most extreme example, where for much of the last 2 years you can't go more than 3 miles from your home. So how long, after 2 years of it, and the latest COVID variant is now everywhere, it's in your room, it's in every space in Australia, how much longer do you think Australians are going to put up with this?
Well, we have federal elections coming up, but for this particular government, Novicron instead of Omicron is what is currently dominating the headlines. I mean, in Novak Djokovic presenting health and order risk to Australia, it's absolutely extraordinary to even believe that we are in this situation. When it comes to border closures, babies have died in northern New South Wales because they had to wait for evacuation flights where the hospital was 2 hours drive across the border.
Yep, no, that's terrible, absolutely terrible. The case I remember is a poor baby from South Australia, I think in Adelaide, and was supposed to be going across the border to New South Wales, and the border got closed, and so the baby died. And for what? For what? This is what's so terrible about it. Thank you very much for joining us, Nina. I'm very grateful to get your perspective from Sydney, because it's a long time since I've been there, and who knows when we'll get to go there again. That goes for Australians in Earl's Court too. Coming up, prisoners in Scottish women's prisons are mysteriously detransitioning from women to men once they get out of jail. What's up with that? Plus, your views. Ask me anything for Stump the Steyn, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Good evening. Wet weather for many this evening, but tomorrow a bit of a north-south split, staying fairly dull and damp across the south, but much brighter skies across the northern half of the UK. This set of weather fronts is responsible for the cloud and rain, but they are all, as I say, shifting south, allowing clearer skies to follow across Scotland and Northern Ireland by morning time, and then eventually across Northern England and Wales as well. But it will be fairly grey to start with, the clouds sticking around here overnight across England, Wales, some rain and drizzle for most, some heavier bursts likely over the Midlands and eastern England. But clearer skies arriving for Scotland and Northern Ireland, allowing a touch of frost certainly over hills and in rural areas. Towns and cities just about staying above. Staying pretty windy across the far northwest. Lighter winds further south, but it will be quite a grey start to Tuesday, albeit pretty mild as well. Still some heavier bursts of rain to come over eastern areas, at least for a time during the morning, but the rain should clear from northern England by mid-morning, North Wales, so brighter skies here for the afternoon. Sunny spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland, always some showers over the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. Temperatures generally close to average across the north, pretty mild in the south, but it will be staying pretty grey here until late on. Eventually though, even across East Anglia in the south east, the rain should disappear through the evening time, and that will allow clear skies for all and a more widespread frost forming as we head into Wednesday morning, and a greater chance of seeing some fog patches too, which may take a while to clear on Wednesday. So some dense fog around over the Midlands in particular on Wednesday morning. A bit more cloud across northern Scotland with some patchy rain again over the Highlands and the Western Isles. But for most, Wednesday's a sparkling day of sunshine, a lovely winter's day with temperatures picking up after that frosty start to about average really for the time of year, 7, 8, maybe 9 or 10 in the northwest. Further frost to come this week, largely dry, some sunshine by day, but some more dense fog patches too.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Mark Steyn on GB News. Let's get straight to your tweets and emails. Bill says, The rich and famous always get their way. If it had been me or you, we'd have been on the plane home days ago. Well, that may well be the case, but in that case, Bill, you should be thankful for Novak Djokovic, who's shed some light on one of these most extreme aspects of Australian immigration, which is that even Australian citizens, it's usually accepted that if you're a citizen of a country, you don't have the right to be denied entry to that country. People holding Australian passports, living in bedsits in Earl's Court, do not have the right to go back to, just fly back to Australia like that. Pete says, it's a win for common sense. I'm glad Novak is clear to play. This has blown up in the Australian government's faces, using a world-class sportsman to win a cheap domestic platitude only to be put right by the Aussie courts. We're told rules are rules, except for when the authoritative government threatened to change them at will. In this case, they changed them in mid-flight. They changed them when he'd got on the plane there. Peter says, who is bothered? This is not Pete, but Peter. R on the end. Peter, a little more formal than Pete. Peter says, who is bothered about one person who hits a ball with a racket? GBNews should focus on the NHS being overwhelmed, on the numerous people who are highly vulnerable due to health conditions, and on those suffering long-term severe pain due to hip and knee replacement delays. Well, you know, Peter, you're missing the point here. Because, in fact, the NHS is exactly the same as the Novak Djokovic story. The NHS being overwhelmed. Oh, why is that? Well, it's being overwhelmed because asymptomatic persons who happen to test positive for Omicron are being told to stay at home. You have another category of NHS workers who, like Novak Djokovic, decline to be vaccinated. Maybe some of them have natural immunities too, because they've all been working up close and personal for 2 years now with COVID patients, but they're told oh no, you can't come to our hospitals, you can't work in our hospitals if you're unvaccinated, you can't work in our hospitals if you happen to test positive for a mild variant that causes you a bit of a headache. Meanwhile, everyone who's got Omicron is being encouraged to head to the hospital. That's why you and your friends are waiting in severe pain for hip and knee replacement delays. It's the exact same story as the Novak Djokovic story, and that is the insanity of the 2-year COVID regime that has not done anything to prevent COVID. As I said, Omicron is everywhere. It's in my room, it's in your room, Peter. It's the same story, and the NHS and the British government are following exactly the same stupid suicidal policies as the Australian government. Steph says, thank goodness Novak won this case. What has happened to him has been a disgrace, and the Australian government should be ashamed. People in Australia and around the world should be holding their governments to account for their campaign of fear and propaganda they've waged on them over the course of this pandemic. Andrew says, the Australian rules are insane, but it is their country and they cannot have some rich bloke circumventing their rules. When thousands of Australian citizens... No. Let's stop all this. Just stop all this. He was issued with a valid visa. I'll give you the number of it so you can look it up. Temporary Activity Subclass 408 visa, issued by Her Majesty's Australian government. He had all the paperwork, Andrew. You got to drop this. Oh, it's their country, and they can't. He only got on the plane because they'd given him permission to enter the country. So knock it off with this stuff, because it's really dumb. It's really stupid. It's actually, it's a little bit pathetic that you should accept that in a country supposedly under the rule of law, a man can be issued with his valid paperwork and then they just rescind it as he's having a moist towelette over the ocean somewhere. Anyway, let's go on. Oh, let's stay with sports. I love sports. Do you follow American sports? No reason why you should. They're boringly corporate, even at the college level, and they're ghastly suck-ups to China too. Even in the Ivy League, there's none of that playing fields of Eton stuff. It's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Playing the game is for losers, winning is everything. Which brings us to Saturday's big varsity swimming showdown between Yale, Dartmouth and the University of Pennsylvania. The ladies' 100-meter freestyle was taken by Yale. The freestyle is certainly a lot more freestyle than it used to be. That's the number 1 and number 2. In this case, Yale's female-to-male transgender swimmer beat Penn's male-to-female transgender swimmer. I'm not sure. I'm trying to work out which is the female-to-male transgender swimmer and which is the male-to-female transgender swimmer. It's also difficult these days, isn't it? Dartmouth, of course, total losers. They placed third because they had to make do with a cis swimmer. I think they let her make the tea and biscuits. We're going through a seismic moment in the Western world, the abolition of biological sex. That's quite a big thing, actually. Bigger than most of the things they talk about in Parliament. Going from that Ivy League swimming meet, it looks like one day soon all the men will be women and all the women will be men, and maybe we'll all be happy, cheerily sporting each other's private parts. Yet J.K. Rowling and Margaret Atwood and a few others seem to intuit that ultimately women will wind up as the big losers in all this and may indeed be totally erased as a concept. They already are at women's prisons where officialdom has galloped out ahead to embrace full-scale abolition of femaleness. That's why the House of Lords is debating this week whether criminals who are biological men should be able to serve their sentences in a women's prison. Because right now, when the judge pronounces, "Take him down," you're free to bellow back, that should be, "Take her down, my lord. I decided to identify as a woman about 3 seconds after the guilty verdict." Deborah So is the author of The End of Gender and host of the terrific Dr. Deborah So podcast, which I'd usually say is available wherever you get your podcasts, but a lot of places where you get your podcasts are trying to shut down the Dr. Deborah So podcast for the usual reasons. So we're delighted to see Deborah at GBNews. Deborah, the House of Lords debate, I think if you went back 30 years, it would seem very odd that this would be even something parliaments would be debating and voting on. Whether people who are biologically male, they haven't had what we used to call a sex change, as the Scottish ladies prisoners complain about, but simply because they choose to identify as another sex, they're allowed to serve time in a female prison, which is always more comfortable than a male prison. Are you surprised at how fast all this is accelerating?
I'm absolutely horrified by it. So it's great to see you again, Mark. Thank you for having me back. I have been following this. You know, I do talk about it in The End of Gender. I do think it's important for us to be able to talk about the differences between women and transgender women. And I think we can do that in a way that is sensitive. But when it's in a situation like prisons or women's sports or women-only spaces, it's really important because women's safety is paramount, especially in prison. You know, I am someone who has had experience working in the past with incarcerated sex offenders, and they are not the most trustworthy group, needless to say. So I'm not frankly surprised if you have incarcerated sex offenders claiming to identify as female in order to get access potentially to further victims, which we have seen. I do think there may be cases in which you have a sex offender who experiences gender dysphoria, and also for trans female inmates, if they are placed in a men's prison, they will be at a higher risk in terms of their safety. So that should be taken into account. But the fact that, that there are these male offenders who identify as female while in prison, who go back to identifying as male once they are released into the community, speaks to the fact that there's something not right here.
Well, I think one of the things that bothers me about it, Deborah, we had last week on the show, we had one of the survivors of the Rotherham grooming gangs on the show, Sammy Woodhouse. And it seems to me a little bit like that here, in that it's the most vulnerable women. So, for example, you have women's shelters in your own country, in Canada. You have women's shelters that will admit men who identify as women. So you have women who go to the women's shelter to get away from predatory men. and they find out that quite opportunistically, men are identifying as women to get into the women's shelter. So often this burden seems to be falling, as in prison and as in the women's shelters, often on the most vulnerable women in society.
Absolutely. And what I find most frustrating is that the activists and the allies who are pushing for these policies and who are pushing for the emphasis on gender self-identification over biological sex, above really everything else, they are not the people who have to live with these decisions. They are not the ones who are going to be living in the shelters or in the prisons among these, in some cases, male rapists or male violent offenders, and having to live day to day with fear and intimidation, and having, in some cases, to be assaulted by them. And that's what I find most upsetting. You know, you talk about, oh, this is not a problem that would have existed, I would say, even a couple decades ago. It really speaks to where we are in 2022, and the fact that these activists really have managed to intimidate so many people into going along with it.
Well, if you look at the little sports story I started with, the Yale and University of Pennsylvania, apparently it's coaches, the win at all costs mentality of these university coaches means that if they're running the ladies track team and a transitioning guy wanders in, they're happy to have him on the track team just because it means they'll get the trophy at the end of the year. But what's I find puzzling about this is the comparative silence of the public. You know, this was a public event on Saturday where a male to female transgender is swimming against a female to male transgender in the so-called women's sporting event, and no cis women, as we say, need be involved in women's sports anymore. Why is the public so silent on this?
I don't think most people are actually okay with this, but they're afraid, and they see what happens to, I mean, as we talked about last time, J.K. Rowling being a continued harassment campaign that she has to deal with because of the very reasonable and sensitive things that she said speaking out against these types of policies. So with regard to sport in particular, as I discussed in The End of Gender, I talk about the science, you know, there's this narrative that if an individual who's born male, who identifies as female, is undergoing hormonal therapy, that this overrides any physical advantages that come along with male puberty. And that's just not true. But I think there's also this sentiment of science denial and what is being perpetuated in the mainstream news by so-called experts. So I think that's part of it as well, because the public sees that and they think, oh, well, maybe that's the truth then. And there are apparently scientific, quote unquote, scientific studies that back up this ideology. So then they feel, well, maybe they don't actually have a place to complain, even though when they can see with their own eyes, when you actually watch these competitions and you see trans athletes who were born male dominating, and the fact that people don't cheer when they actually win and they wait until it's a woman who wins that the audience is actually cheering. I mean, I think people know intuitively, but it just goes back to the intimidation and the fear.
Yes, against that lack of cheering, though, Deborah, there was a poll in the Daily Mail at the end of the year. You know, and the Daily Mail is supposed to represent the views of Middle England. That's who they publish for. And in that poll, they were asked whether the statement was true that only a woman can have a cervix. And 50% of poll respondents, Daily Mail poll respondents, disagreed with that. Are you surprised? Is that just intimidation too, that people don't want them, you know, people to think that they're not okay with it?
Wow, that's really surprising. I wonder if it's a generational thing too, because I think younger generations are more on board with this ideology that says that, you know, anything goes. Biological sex is a spectrum. There are millions of genders. People can identify however they want. Gender self-identification is more important than biological sex or material reality. So that could be part of it. I think some people are just genuinely confused and they think, well, if I'm being told that anyone can have a cervix, then okay, I guess I'm on board with that.
Yeah, there's, what did you say? No objective reality. There's, that's kind of where we are. I think on that point they may be right. Thank you as always for that, Deborah, and don't let them shut down the Dr. Deborah So podcast, because that is a terrific podcast. Still to come, we have Stump the Steyn. Ask me anything you want. You can tweet me at GBNews. Also coming up, he doesn't play tennis, but he has more in common with Novak Djokovic than you might think. Straight ahead on The Mark Steyn Show.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
GB News on TV and radio, whichever's your bag is groovy with us. To read the so-called mainstream papers, you'd think the unvaccinated were a great seething mass of swamp-dwelling, knuckle-dragging, inbred morons taking time off between a jigger of moonshine and a bunk-up with their cousin to advertise their anti-science racism. That's basically Justin Trudeau's view and Emmanuel Macron's. But at least one of the unvaccinated is a Massachusetts Institute of Technology graduate, a Democrat, so he's not a Trump supporter. He works in public health in South Africa. Corey Zhu joins me now. Corey, it's great to see you. I read a piece you wrote trying to work out your position on where you are and how the wider world got to be like this, because you were over there in South Africa and you didn't really realize how whether you're vaxxed or unvaxxed had become a sort of partisan political thing back in your home country. So just tell us why you're not vaxxed. You've had the COVID, and you've had a little bout of that. So you have what we used to call natural immunity, but the scientists don't seem to believe in natural immunity anymore. So where did your anti-vax thing come from?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long and kind of evolving story. But I mean, I talk about this whole thing in the essay, but it's it started with my mom. I think she planted sort of a seed of doubt about the vaccines. And here in South Africa, because the vaccines were distributed to the West before much of the developing world, we didn't even really have access to the vaccines until sort of middle of last year, and I wasn't even eligible until July, and so over that time I could kind of just watch and see what developed and try to do my own assessment of the vaccines. And when I looked at it, I saw that that as sort of a healthy, relatively young person, I'm 39. COVID didn't look to be sort of any more statistically dangerous for me than something like a heart attack or getting murdered or something like that. And so I didn't have sort of this urgent need to vaccinate to protect myself. And then I was still thinking like, okay, I should still be a good citizen in the world, and I should still get the vaccine to protect those around me. But then, over time, the vaccine was waning a bit, and I wasn't sure. We didn't know a lot about the long-term effects and all that. And so I was kind of deliberating. I was on the fence. I was genuinely sort of like talking about it every day with my wife, wondering whether we should do it. And then we got COVID. And then once we had natural immunity, it became clear to me that the vaccine was going to do very little for me, and still came with some, small but existing risk. And that's kind of when I decided, well, I don't need this thing right now. And then over time, it's continued to change. I think now the main reason that I'm not doing it is just because I've become a little bit concerned about what's going on in the world, about sort of the decoupling of evidence from the public discourse and lots of the ways that people are talking about the shot and as you mentioned, sort of like shaming the unvaccinated, that type of thing. And so now I feel like I'm in a unique position as one of maybe a small number of Democrats who are willing to at least publicly say that they're in this position. I thought, well, if I don't sort of speak up now, then who's going to?
Well, you made an interesting point in your piece, because you said basically since this Omicron came along, we've all got it. It's hanging all over the room. It's everywhere. You pointed out that the Pfizer vaccine, according to the biggest South African survey, its effectiveness has dwindled from 80% to, I think, 29% now. And probably, if we were to look at it in 5-6 weeks' time, it'd be even lower. So the idea that governments are insisting that you should get a vaccine that's 29% effective is slightly odd, don't you find?
I do find it odd, and I mean, it's worth pointing out it's 29% effective against infection. The vaccine still seems to be doing quite well preventing severe illness and death. But again, as a healthy person who's already had COVID, that those severe outcomes they're just so low that it didn't strike me as an important factor in my own personal decision. And so yeah, I find the mandates really strange. It's I think it felt like they were originally justified because the unvaccinated people were going to be getting the disease more, they were going to be spreading the disease more. That line of reasoning makes sense to me if you can prove that the vaccines are have no substantial harms. But then once they stop doing that, then it does really seem like the focus should just be on individuals' health, and you should be able to make the decision based on how you view the risk to your own health and your own statistical likelihood of ending up in the hospital or something like that.
Now you said you were a relatively young 39, and I certainly don't want to make you feel any older than that. But there's governments around the world who are mandating this for everybody above the age of 2. Which seems very odd. There hasn't been a time in human history when the same one-size-fits-all cure-all has been prescribed for every inhabitant on the planet. Are you surprised at the way people have just generally gone along with that? Just a little bit. Even you did a little bit of it now. Oh yes, I know it doesn't prevent me getting infected, but if I do get infected, I'm not gonna be in the ICU and in danger of dying. I mean, the goalposts are moving. Meanwhile, they're saying, oh, if we just go to the maternity ward, get the needle and jab these kids as they come out of the birth canal, then everything will be okay. There's never been a time when there's been one medicine for everybody on the planet, has there?
Oh, I don't know, but I totally disagree with you that the younger and younger you go, the more dangerous and potentially harmful the idea of mandating these things go, and especially with young kids. I mean, like they are so statistically unlikely to end up in the hospital. There was a German study that showed that no healthy 5 to 11-year-old in all of Germany had died from COVID. It was only the ones who had other diseases, cancer, that type of thing. And so even though the vaccines appear to be quite safe, to mandate that, even to people of those age who have literally almost zero risk of any severe outcomes, while also not stopping the disease from spreading, I agree, is very, very strange.
You're from Massachusetts, which is one of the most gung-ho. I mean, even the few Republicans who are in Massachusetts, such as the governor, are generally in favor of a very severe COVID regime. You have the good fortune to be in South Africa. Do your Democrat friends back in the United States still speak to you? Have they forgiven you your apostasy on this?
Yeah, they do. I tend to run in some relatively open-minded and supportive circles. So I've had very little personal sort of retaliation towards being unvaccinated. I think what disturbed me more was just the everybody assumes that I'm vaccinated until I published this essay, obviously. And there were lots of conversations where people would just sort of casually drop in some sort of, joke or insult or something about vaccination status. And it was always, I had to uncomfortably kind of say like, well, I actually am one of those people. And it wasn't meant in a harmful way, but it was, it made me realize how far that narrative had permeated through my social circles.
Yeah, the divide there. Well, I'm impressed you found an open-minded part of Massachusetts for your circle of friends. That's heartening to hear. But yours is a very interesting story, Corey, because you looked at the science on all sides of this issue, and you did what freeborn individuals do. You weighed your own circumstances. It's age. You took into account your age, your weight, your diabetes, your heart disease, your stroke, or whatever, and you reached the judgment that was right for you. And if all individuals did do that, this situation might be very different 2 years into it. Thank you for joining us from South Africa, Corey, and good luck. Your wife's Canadian, and you can't go and see your in-laws right now because of your vaccination status. So we'll have to do something with Her Majesty's government in Ottawa to get them to see sense on that. Thank you very much, Corey. Glad you could join us. Let's get to your comments before we say goodbye here. Hugh says, for my money, we have the best governor, Ron DeSantis. This is an American writing from Florida. In terms of supporting conservative causes, allowing freedom of speech, not bowing to failed and fraudulent policies of the pandemic, and the most effective. Where, oh where, are the Ron DeSantises of the UK, of the Commonwealth and the continent? There is political, just to look at it in political terms, which I don't really want to do, but there's a significant difference between Serbia and a lot of Eastern Europe, where Nigel Farage is right now, and the rest of the West. There is political space here for someone who wants to run with it. Ben says, dear Mark, now Djokovic has had the victory in sport. What about the NHS? Heroes who risk their lives to care for the sick, only to lose their jobs because now they don't want the vaccine. That's true. We have to stop thinking in terms of vaccines. And actually, the vaccine now has become separated from the disease. Vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. Oh, we just have to have a triple shot, a quadruple shot or whatever. Wait a minute, what's the disease doing? Oh, it just invented Omicron. That doesn't seem to be doing very much at all. That's not... Vaccines have become entirely separated from what they're vaccinating against. Helen says, shall I stand idly by while a biological male action group tries to erase or co-opt my existence as a biological woman? Why, no, Mark, I don't think I will. What say you? No, this is the point. What that swimming competition, the Yale, Pennsylvania thing demonstrated is that in certain areas, men make much better women than women do. So are women going to put up with that? Judith says, sometimes we see a flag on your right. What country is it? Well, this is actually, if I can get to it, this was actually the flag of the Dominion of Canada, 1922 to 1957, when the Queen, by letters patent, took the bare breasts off the Irish harp. And who among us does not want a full-breasted colleen on the Irish harp? That is it from me. You're in the best of hands for the next 2 hours. Dan Wootton is here to make your Monday for 2 swinging hours. You're going to love him. It's the best late-night show that you will see right here on GB News. Stay safe, stay free. I'll see you tomorrow at 8 p.m. See you then.
Good evening. Wet weather for many this evening, but tomorrow a bit of a north-south split, staying fairly dull and damp across the south, but much brighter skies across the northern half of the UK. This set of weather fronts is responsible for the cloud and rain, but they are all, as I say, shifting south, allowing clearer skies to follow across Scotland and Northern Ireland by morning time, and then eventually across Northern England and Wales as well. But it will be fairly grey to start with, the clouds sticking around here overnight across England, Wales, some rain and drizzle for most, some heavier bursts likely over the Midlands and Eastern England, but clearer skies arriving for Scotland and Northern Ireland, allowing a touch of frost certainly over hills and in rural areas. Towns and cities just about staying above. Staying pretty windy across the far northwest. Lighter winds further south, but it will be quite a grey start to Tuesday, albeit pretty mild as well. Still some heavier bursts of rain to come over eastern areas, at least for a time during the morning, but the rain should clear from northern England by mid-morning, North Wales, so brighter skies here for the afternoon. Sunny spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland, always some showers over the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. Temperatures generally close to average across the north, pretty mild in the south, but it will be staying pretty grey here until late on. Eventually though, even across East Anglia in the south east, the rain should disappear through the evening time, and that will allow clear skies for all and a more widespread frost forming as we head into Wednesday morning, and a greater chance of seeing some fog patches too, which may take a while to clear on Wednesday. So some dense fog around over the Midlands in particular on Wednesday morning. A bit more cloud across northern Scotland with some patchy rain again over the Highlands and the Western Isles. But for most, Wednesday's a sparkling day of sunshine.